Welcome to The Explainer. There's a perfect storm of challenges brewing over Europe, and according to at least one Dutch politician, the continent is, well, dangerously losing its edge. Today, we're diving into his stark warning, his diagnosis of the problems, and what he thinks must be done about it.
We're becoming one big resort where you can go on vacation. Wow, that is a pretty sharp diagnosis, and it comes from Dutch politician Silvio Erkens. His point? Europe is becoming a place people visit, not a place where things are actually built or innovated anymore. He sees a gathering storm of economic, geopolitical, and internal problems that threaten the continent's prosperity. So let's break down his view of the problem, and maybe more importantly, his proposed solutions.
All right, let's start with the economy. From where Erkins is standing, the very foundations are showing some really dangerous cracks. And it all begins with the one currency that's supposed to hold everything together, the euro. So why is the euro under threat? Well, in Erkin's view, the core issue isn't just about money. It's about a fundamental disagreement on how to manage it. There's this growing divide and, fiscal discipline right at the heart of the eurozone. And this really frames the tension perfectly. On one side, you've got Northern European countries that are all about balanced budgets and fiscal discipline. But on the other, you have countries in the South that are really struggling with high debt. Erkins points to France as a key example. Get this, it hasn't had a single budget surplus since 1974. His warning is that eventually financial markets are just going to lose their patience and force some really painful changes. This opposition to sharing debt is exactly why his party is so dead set against the idea of Eurobonds. The argument is pretty simple. If you lump all the debt together, you take away the main reason for countries with poor financial habits to actually reform their economies. You're just kicking the can down a much, much more dangerous road. But look, the economic stuff is only part of the story. Erkins argues that while Europe is busy with its own internal struggles, huge threats are growing on the outside. Threats he believes the continent is dangerously unprepared to face all on its own. The picture he paints is a continent that's caught in like a geopolitical vice. You've got an America on one side that's way more focused on its own interests, using trade as a weapon, and on the other, you have a rising China that is actively and successfully competing with European industry. The result? He warns it's a vulnerable and dependent Europe. Really, it all comes down to self-reliance. From Erkin's perspective, Europe has kind of forgotten how to project strength. He says, in the world we live in now, strength is respected. So without a massive investment in its own defense and industrial power, Europe just can't be a credible global player and has to rely on an American ally that's looking more and more inward. But for Erkins, and this is crucial, the biggest threat isn't actually external at all. He argues it's a self-inflicted wound, a deep cultural problem of suffocating bureaucracy and an aversion to taking any risks whatsoever. And look, the intentions behind all these rules and regulations, they're often good, right? But he argues that when you add it all up, the cumulative effect is just paralysis. The system has become so obsessed with trying to regulate every single possible risk away, no matter how tiny, that it ends up preventing anything meaningful from getting done.
And he's got a pretty jaw-dropping example to back this up. A multi-billion euro investment from Dow Chemical that just packed up and left the Netherlands. Let me tell you what happened.
This story is a perfect, almost painful example of his concern. So Dow Chemical was ready to pour billions into modernizing and cleaning up its plant, but the entire project was reportedly shot down over a tiny technicality, a minor detail in nitrogen regulations for just one small part of the new construction. The result? That €3 billion investment and all the jobs and innovation that would have come with it left the Netherlands and went to Canada instead. And if you want a number that he sees as a symptom of this bureaucratic sickness, how about this one? 70,000. That's the number of new civil servants added in the Netherlands over the last 5 years. For Erkins, this just shows a government that keeps growing and growing, getting more complex and expensive, but not actually getting any more effective. And who pays for all of this? Well, you guessed it, the taxpayer. The social tax burden in the Netherlands has climbed from 34% to 39% under the previous government. That money is directly funding the expansion of the state, while, in his view, slowing down the actual economy. So if that's the diagnosis, a shaky economy, a vulnerable position on the world stage, and a government paralyzed by its own red tape, what's the cure? Erkins isn't talking about small tweaks here. He's calling for a radical, fundamental overhaul of government itself.
His big idea is to shift away from the current model, drawing inspiration from a place like Singapore. The goal is to create a government that's smaller but much higher quality, one that isn't trying to regulate every little aspect of life, but instead focuses on the core tasks like security and creating a stable environment for business, and then basically gets out of the way.
And this involves a really concrete, multi-pronged attack on the problem. We're talking about taking a chainsaw to the red tape, especially for big, important projects like new energy sources. It means shrinking the size of the state, getting smarter with EU funds by pushing money into future-focused areas like AI and defense, and finally, creating a culture that actually enables progress instead of blocking it. So, at the end of the day, Erkin's diagnosis is crystal clear. Europe is on a dangerous path, and the time for slow, gradual change is over. He believes a kind of shock therapy is the only thing that can cure the sickness. And that leaves us with the big question. Is this radical vision the necessary prescription for Europe's future? Or is the cure itself a risk that's just too great to take?